Hey guys, I'm Lucanio.
I'm Eric.
And this is
Politics Through Literature.
Let's go. Okay, so we are launching this podcast to bring together two of our favorite things, books and politics. We're really excited to let you in on the amazing conversations we have. I'm here with my dad, who has shared with me, books and knowledge about the world that I never knew before. I had a very superficial outlook on the world, and we want this to be educational, to be cutthroat and revealing about what goes on. And we hope that you can, learn a thing or two while you're here. I know I have. And we'll be speaking about some books.
And politics.
So today we're going to start with a book called The Seed Is Mine by Charles Van Onselen. And this is a biography of Kas Maine. He was born Ramabonela Maine. And he is a very important figure, a very unknown important figure, because he lived as an economically independent man throughout apartheid, pre-apartheid, and during apartheid. He was born in 1894 and lived to be 91. He died in 1985. So just as South Africa was approaching democracy. And 1894 to 1985, those are critical years. So we have the discovery of gold a few years before he was born. We have the Second Anglo-Boer War in 1899. So that white,
absolutely,
conflict.
And even the Second World War.
And even the Second World War.
And the end of the Second World War.
The fight for which white regime is going to rule South Africa. We have the First and Second World War. And people undermine the role that Black South Africans played in all of those wars, the Anglo-Boer War, the World War. We have the formation of the first trade union in South Africa. I actually am only halfway through the book. We're gonna have a second segment. So I haven't even reached apartheid. We're still in the 1930s. Pre-apartheid. But still so much is happening, and every page is just filled with so much to dissect. And it's incredible because when I was in school, the history of South Africa only starts with 1948.
Yeah.
We don't know about what happened before.
Yeah. And just to add on to what Lucanio has just shared with you, the most of us, and I say with all due respect, most South Africans think of South Africa's history from 1652, when the three ships landed in the Cape of Good Hope. And prior to 1652, it's almost like we never existed. There was no life in this country. There were no people, and the only people started with the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck. So we need to debunk that through The Seed Is Mine, and the story of Kas Maine shows relatively the story of almost all of us, the hardships, the struggles, the trials and tribulations of almost every family. And the biggest question is, and the biggest lesson from this is the land issue.
What is amazing about this book is it doesn't just start with Kas Maine. It goes back two generations of his family. There's not many of us Black people in this day and age. We're so urbanized. We've been so removed from land that can trace our families so far back, and with detail at least. And it starts with his great-grandfather. So this man, Charles Van Onselen, he did research into Kas's life. He interviewed Kas, of course. We see a lot of his quotes and his personal voice, his personal referencing, and yeah, that's so true. We don't know what happened before 1652. So imagine our existence is based on this history painted by
the victor,
essentially foreigners that came. So the victors, exactly. So we're going to speak about this book, and the first thing that I want to pose, one of the most central themes of this book, is the idea of land. And land in South Africa is a very big issue. You know, there is something we all know as the land issue. What happens to land? You know, after 1994, one of the biggest mandates, one of the biggest projects for the ANC was land redistribution. And the goal was to redistribute, I think it was 60 million hectares of land. And that's 32% of the land in South Africa.
Right.
I think we've only just reached the halfway mark. It's been 30 years of democracy. We've only just reached the halfway mark. And that means that only, 14% of South Africa, of South Africa's land has been given back to the indigenous people of this land, of this country. So it's a big issue.
It is, because looking at the life of Kasinyana Maine, and as we alluded earlier, that every South African, and to a large extent every African, the aim of the colonizer was to take land by force. And why? And we go back to what you were just asking me now. Why is land such an emotive and critical issue in our body politic and in the lives of all of us? One, what does land provide? Maybe before we answer that one, why was land stolen from us? It's because land has everything that makes us who we are. Our identity is tied to the land. We walk the land where our rivers flow, the land where our minerals come from, the land where our food will be planted and harvested. And land provides shelter. It provides a sense of belonging, stability. And even in African rituals, the umbilical cord after a child has been born, where does it go? It's not thrown into the dumping site or into a river. It's buried somewhere where it's sacred, and that area is where the child's existence almost is derived from. It's not in the sky, it's on land. Now, why are we poor? And why are the colonizers still rich? Because our land has provided them with the means of production. When you have land, you have shelter, you have resources, you can mine, you can own that mine because it's on your land, and that mine will provide you with economic activity, will be able to build schools, will be able to build health facilities and other related infrastructure into the community or for the community rather. So the economic exclusion of the natives, of the Africans, is deliberate. And as you are sharing the Seed is Mine, the life of Kasinyana Maine, you see exactly that throughout the book, that he's been denied the right to take part in the economic activity through agriculture. And agriculture, excluding mining and other related economic activities, is the cornerstone of any economy in any country. With agriculture, you can build factories to process products from the agricultural sector. You can train new farmers into the market. You can build roads to transport. So agriculture and the results of the build-up and the development of agriculture leads to so many things, provides jobs. Agriculture alone could provide almost half of the jobs we need in the country. So the land issue is very important, and the figures that you shared with us about not even half of the land stolen from us with the Land Act of 1913 has been returned to us. And it's going to be a battle.
Yeah, and this, you know, the importance of agriculture and what it could do for our country economically is so necessary to address because we have lost what was actually our inherent skill, our inherent gift as a civilization. You know, we talk about Western civilization. In fact, we associate civilization with the West, when in fact, Kas Maina and his family, they were sought after. I mean, he comes from a long line of very skilled farmers. I mean, they were one of the only families who, when everyone was suffering from drought, they looked to them and said, how are you guys doing this? They were so gifted in that domain.
Right.
And that's the thing, we've been removed from that because of urbanization. We have been forced to follow this model. And we are just continuously trying to catch up with something that isn't even, you know.
Exactly. In fact, you got me thinking of when you talk about these indigenous skills. The Maina family were able to share, or to use rather, to have a better crop yield, even during the days or the years or the seasons when there was drought. Now, we often, you know, modern scientists and those who are concerned talk about the amount of poisonous what do you call that is used to combat insects,
pesticides.
Pesticides. Thank you. The Maina family, by and large, would have used indigenous ways that had no negative impact on their health, as opposed to how we experience pesticides. And we know there's big battles going out in big cities and courthouses around the world, around Roundup, for instance, and all of these other companies, Mondrason and so on, that are using pesticides, and they are not using them in Europe, rather using them on the African continent. But the Maina family was able to use indigenous knowledge and to their advantage. And why that knowledge was eradicated or rather destroyed. It's the grand plan of the colonizer that we have become who we are because we've lost those skills, we've lost our belief systems, we've lost a lot of the indigenous medical knowledge that we used before the arrival of the imperialists. So the suffering that you see, the poverty, the urbanization, is not necessarily a good thing, as you just alluded about Western civilization. And the question can be asked, what is Western civilization? How do you measure Western civilization? Is it the economic activity? Is it the lack, the erosion of indigenous knowledge systems that we used to hold dear? What is Western civilization? Because we can have a debate some other time about it.
That's that's actually a good question to ask, and it leads to my next theme that I wanted to bring forward. But before I get there, I wanted to speak about this. I want to just stay with this idea of land. It's important to it's important to denote that Kas Maina and his family, they managed to stay so prosperous as farmers, and Kas throughout his life managed to yield his economic independence through sharecropping. Not just through sharecropping, he had other skills. That was one of the amazing things about Kas, is that he was a man of many traits.
Right.
He never found an excuse to sit on his ass and do nothing. You know, he was a traditional healer. He was a cobbler. He worked in the mines. His goal was always, I need to provide for my family. But the book is called The Seed is Mine, The Life of Kas Maina, a South African sharecropper. So I'm going to just define briefly what a sharecropper is, because it's quite important, and I don't know if it's something that's still practiced in modern times, but basically sharecropping is, well, I'm sure it is, but in smaller communities. So sharecropping is when two parties come together. One has land, the other has labor, the other has skills in farming. And the landowner, would say, or they would come to an agreement with the laborers, you can stay on my land and we split the harvest. And this is an important concept or term to understand, because it represents pre-apartheid, when blacks and whites were working together. There was interracial cooperation.
Yes.
And it's actually, while I was reading this and I was seeing how Kas and his family and other families, even other white families, would migrate around the Transvaal, that triangle.
What used to be called the PWV triangle.
The PWV.
Yeah.
What does that stand for?
I'll tell you now.
It represents this interracial cooperation, and when I was reading this, those first few chapters, I thought, my gosh, this is this lost dream, this lost could have been that South Africa could have had if it wasn't for the greed of just owning, and the greed of capitalism.
Exactly.
And yes, the desperation of these Afrikaans white farmers. But even then, if they could have just removed this idea that there's a racial superiority, there's a racial hierarchy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with that arrangement also, what comes to the fore is that you've got two parties entering into an agreement, right? And this is pre-1948, before the formalization of the legislation of apartheid. There was that white supremacist mentality in these arrangements, because some of the partners in these agreements turned out to be brutal, racist, and so apartheid was did not only actually formally start in 1948. It existed. 1948 only saw it being legislated into law in parliament. Prior to that, you had Kasinyana's experience as a sharecroppers, where they would then divide the harvest equally between the two parties. However, it sometimes never happened. The Maina family would probably just be given 10% of what they were entitled to, and then without even any pre-warning, they would just be kicked out of the farm. And so they had this nomadic existence with all the skills they had, simply because someone believed that they were inferior and they were not entitled to any form of respect, any form of justice, if any. And that basically, as you shared with us, is the life and trials and tribulations of Kas Maina. And it's a sad thing, because throughout history you see white supremacy rearing its ugly head when it's not even necessary, where the advantages of partnerships and honoring agreements and contracts are just thrown out the window. Absolutely. Simply because the other party is seen as being inferior.
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I knew this, but I was thinking I was being too optimistic and idealistic, because there were moments when he stayed with families, white families, that honored their agreements and that who were fair. But it was the surrounding farms. It was one family that he stayed with, and I mean, it was perfect. The relationship was perfect. To us, it was almost wow, too good to be true, until there was this one, and his brother warned him that, okay, be careful, that while this family, they're decent people, be careful of the surrounding farmers. And this was now after the Native Land Acts in 1913. So we have white farmers being a little bit, not a little bit, but more wary and fearful of having the sharecropping arrangement. Before it was a normal thing, now it's becoming almost taboo. So now he's living with this, well, not living with, he has this agreement with a white family, and then this white farmer comes and makes a deal with Cuss and actually swindles him. So exactly what you're talking about, but it eclipses all of the good that could have been.
Yes.
All of the cooperation that could have been because of these greedy, dishonest people.
Right.
And it's so sad. And you mentioned honor and just having that spirit of, we are brothers.
But interesting enough, as you alluded earlier, what would make an individual renege on agreements when two parties that should honor that, one has a sense of God-given superiority, and the other one is seen as inferior, but what they bring with their skills is appreciated. However, there's certain parts of that agreement that are just going to be declared null and void, because there is a very deep, unacknowledged, sometimes even denied sense of superiority by, and I'm not painting everybody as the same, but by and large, the white people across the world, and there are good people amongst them, but white people, more especially the earlier generation, even today, that's why we have what we call new neocons, new conservatives, who are hell-bent on continuing with this unjust ways of dealing with Africans. What would drive a man to have agreed to an arrangement and renege on it? Because there is this constant sense of superiority, white superiority. We go in, we take by force. Whether people die, but as long as we get what we want. And that is the story of this whole continent. From Ghana to Eritrea to Djibouti, from Cape Town to Cairo, it's the story of the African continent. No respect for Africans in any area whatsoever.
That is the question. And it's a story that continues.
It continues.
I mean, if we look at the ruling of the ICJ that says that Israel must retreat its forces, and what have they done? And
return all movable assets to the Palestinians. Nothing.
What have they done? Of course, they feel like who are a billion, not a billion, but how many countries were in support of this ruling? Of course, who are they? Who are they?
Exactly.
We're going to continue.
Yeah.
We're going to kill We're gonna destroy until there's nothing left.
Exactly.
Because we want what we want.
And where does their argument for the right to occupy Palestinian lands come from? From religious texts that are interpreted to suit them and exclude the other Palestinians.
So now that leads to the second question or second theme that I wanted to bring forward. So we have religion. We were speaking about how there were two things that colonialists came with: religion and military.
Yeah.
Religion and armed forces, the gun.
Yeah.
Two very effective methods or effective tools in getting what they want. Land.
Right.
Being the first thing. We have the missionaries coming and saying, listen, we want to build our church in your village.
Right.
Can we do that? Can we come to some sort of agreement? Okay, fine. They didn't just build the church though. They said, okay, we've realized that you guys are actually quite barbaric. We see how this has eroded what we once believed in. And how it all starts with land. It all starts with them coming to our spaces, our sacred spaces. We had sacred forests, we had forbidden territories.
Right.
And I mean, this was all just completely destabilized. And we see the loss of ancestral knowledge, and that's the theme. Ancestral knowledge, that the seed is mine, speaks a lot about one of Cus's strengths, actually. So Cus, as I said before, he was an Ngaka. He was a traditional herbalist, and that was a skill, a gift that was passed on to him by his father. His father recognized that, okay, wow, he's very skilled with herbs.
Understanding,
and so he became a medicinal herbalist. And this was how he made a living at times. Something that helped many families throughout the community, the different communities he lived in. And now in this day and age,
I want to go back to where you started with the impact of the two things that the colonizers brought into our lands. The military-industrial complex and the Bible or religion. And my way of looking at it and what I believe is true is that from the beginning of time, those who have the military power tend to also have the power to decimate, or rather to tell their own story in a particular way. And the best way to disarm and create doubt is to erode what people have used to give them a sense of purpose, identity, acknowledging life after death, which Africans always knew that there was life after death. They didn't necessarily need the Bible to remind them that. So the Bible, in my view, is a propaganda tool that has turned out to actually become a negative in modern times. And then you mentioned Israel and Palestine. Israel's existence and arguments for existence are based on biblical texts. One section of the global community say religion is a force for good. Is it a force for good with the Palestinians if the Israelis are using religious texts to steal Palestinian lands?
So I get where you're coming from, and I agree to a certain extent that anything that is good can be used for evil.
Yeah.
And anything that is good can be corrupted. Firstly, I'm not against religion. I really am not against religion, but I'm against false religion. I'm against telling someone what to believe.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. And we're being told that it's one or the other. If, you don't believe in our white God, then there's nothing else.
You're right.
And that's where we become so disconnected.
And
from
allow me to come in there and allow me to be a little narrow with my sort of analysis of how the Bible was manipulated to subjugate Africans, and use the 10 Commandments here and there. Thou shalt not kill, right? Thou shalt not judge, because you are not God. We were judged from day one as barbarians, uncouth, not worthy of being treated as human beings. The very first, probably the earliest form of human trafficking was stealing full adults from their lands into slavery. And today we are told human trafficking this and human trafficking this, and those who used to traffic human beings are now presenting themselves as trying to oppose human trafficking. Those who do human trafficking today learned from the very same people who are saying human trafficking is bad. Now, and why I'm going into this space is that the colonizer has always absolved themselves of wrongdoing when they are caught with their hands in the cookie jar. They even put a spin on slavery to say we never stole anyone. The kings gave us people. And those kings would probably have lost a daughter, a son through the gun to prove to them that we have the power and we can shoot that one from this distance, and then if you don't, you're gonna enjoy the same fate. Now give us men and women that we need to take into those boats or those ships. It's always denial of complicity. They always use that. The very same people who brought us religion killed more than 10 million Congolese. The very same people who brought from the land of Martin Luther, who started the Lutheran Church in Germany, killed more than 6 million people in Namibia. They never want to acknowledge, they never want to pay compensation or reparations, nothing. These are really cold people. And today they are back on this continent. The French committed atrocities in the Francophone countries that they colonized. They refuse to acknowledge that they are still stealing from those countries. So the life of Kasinyana Maine for me represents the pain of the entire continent.
I just thought now of the term Commonwealth countries.
Yep.
I mean, I always knew that is just a weird little banner that they've, put on us. These newly independent countries that are now part of the global community. Okay, they're still ours, but we'll call them the Commonwealth countries. Now, even the name links to sharecropping, actually.
Exactly.
Commonwealth.
Yeah.
You work.
Yeah.
We allow you to work, we allow you to live in existence, and together we benefit from what you have labored.
Yes.
It will be the Commonwealth.
And then we have labels, the Commonwealth, which are former colonies of England. And then you've got the Francophone.
Imagine.
The Franco still represents the hand of France in your lands. You cannot sign contracts independent of France's approval. The Lusophone, those are the Portuguese or French and I mean German and so on. Now, and all of that comes with what? What Kwame Nkrumah's book, Neo-Colonization. He's the man who coined this new word, neo, from Greek new, right? So the colonizer has never left. He says, I'm coming with aid, but aid has interest. What kind of aid is that? Is it a loan, or are you assisting me to get by and do things for my people in my country if I have to pay back aid assistance as a loan that has higher interests? The poor countries pay more or higher interest rates than the rich countries.
Yeah.
Some countries don't even pay 1% above what they borrowed from these institutions. So new colonizer, the colonizer, the white supremacist minded people will always want to find a way to keep the indigenous people subjugated one way or the other.
Yeah. And returning to Cus, he's such a beacon of light, because throughout all of that, he managed to stay economically independent. So that brings me back to ancestral knowledge. You know, we learn in this education system that if you want to get better, you visit the doctor, you take some pills. If you have a question about history, where you come from, you know, Google, encyclopedia, whatnot. But we no longer sit at the knees of our elders and listen and learn and spread. We are consuming everything that is pumped from the West, from America, especially in South Africa. We are Americanized. And we have lost that connection to the ancestors. I mean, you mentioned the umbilical cord and where does it get put. The umbilical cord, thanks to the land that we do not have, has been cut. You know? So in 1913, we have the Native Lands Act, which is an act that took Black South Africans and it partitioned South Africa, took Black South Africans, put them in these tiny little spaces. What year that was exactly?
Around 1955, when your first townships were built, promulgated, planned by the Group Areas Act.
The Group Areas Act. But this is a forerunner. This is an introduction to the geographical partitioning of South Africa and Black people being completely dispossessed of land. And what does that mean? It means that they have no arable land to grow their food.
Correct.
You know, they have to rely on these these tiny stores.
And as a result of that, if I may add, not only disposition of the land, but also taking away livestock, because the argument that was put was that you have too many cattle or too many goats or a lot of sheep, and you don't have enough land for them to graze. So we're gonna take 80% and then leave you with 10. You know, you become a subsistence farmer basically, which is not enough to sustain your family. You know, there's no food security. You are forced to go and work on their farms and their mines.
And earn so little that they didn't even feel like it was enough to bring home to their families. So they would just drink it up in shebeens.
Exactly.
And that is so sad. That's 2-3 generations of people that are completely dispossessed, of people that, are separated, families broken. It's horrific. It's really sad, and we see the effects of that today. And that loss of what once was, but Cus, he managed to keep us a stable family. But Cus, and I don't know if it's because he was granted that gift. He was given that gift of knowledge from his dad. And he stayed connected to his beliefs. You know, he always looked at the church. He even looked at politics and all of those laws with a wary eye. And he knew what he knew and believed. You know, if he was going through some bad luck, he would say, okay, I need to be cleansed. And he'd go and he'd perform rituals and he'd be cleansed. His wife was, it was during her 3rd or 4th pregnancy that she had a problem with her legs. What did he do? He visited a traditional healer, a doctor from far, traveled to see him, and he said, okay, look, I've already heard about your wife. You know, they had that network. This was before the age of, you know, Google and social media. That he had already known there was a network, and he said, this is what you should do. After 3 weeks, she was healed. She couldn't walk, she was crawling. They put milk and cloth on her legs, and she was healed. Imagine that. That's gone.
Exactly. And the impact of that being gone is that even beneficiaries of that indigenous knowledge, who are Africans, have been impacted by the propaganda of Big Pharma, that they look down on those traditional ways of healing ourselves. When you practice that, you often get a lot of criticism from your own people because they believe that lab-generated meds are better, and no one cares about the fallout, you know, the impact, the negative impact, the cancers associated with all this lab-generated meds. So it's unfortunate that we've fallen into that, we've been hoodwinked by propaganda to believe and look at ourselves or that which belongs to us as inferior.
When you mentioned that we look down on each other as Black people, this is so true, and it's one thing that it irks me. It makes me so angry how we have internalized, without even knowing, the Western model. Even throughout all the struggles that we've fought and won, the battle of racial subjugation, we still look to white people as being superior, inherently. Many of us, not all of us, but many of us, without even knowing, still think that anything that is packaged and written in a foreign language, in a foreign Western language, must be legitimate, must be right, must be, you know, more advanced. And it's sickening. And that leads me to my 3rd theme that I picked up from just half the book that I've read, is a social theory, a biological norm that we've accepted, the theory of evolution. Charles Darwin, you know, I was speaking to Mom, and I asked her, do you believe in the theory of evolution? Do you believe that we came from monkeys? And she said no. And I wish that I had asked her this a long time ago, because my whole life I've believed that we come from monkeys. Have you believed in the theory of evolution? Did you ever believe in the theory of evolution?
I know I'm an optimist, but the two theories that have been presented to the world of how we came to be as human beings, Adam and Eve, and
the theory of evolution.
I never could find a reconciliation and believe in any of them. And more so when I became interested in white supremacy, and I saw the two of them linked and being used to steal the origin of life or the origin of human beings from Africans, because once it is acknowledged that human beings originate from Africa, that is so powerful that white supremacy will have a problem infiltrating the truth of the matter that and the fact that all humanity comes from Africa. And coming from Africa means each and every human being on earth is black by design. That's it. How they became white can be debated, moving away from Africa, moving into cold, icy parts of the globe, of the world. That is something else. But having to steal and change the truth using either Darwinism or the first passages of Genesis to say Adam and Eve. These are people who claim to be custodians of knowledge.
Absolutely.
But they can't even agree.
And the sad thing is how they've trained us to believe it's one or the other.
Yes.
You know, it's either Adam and Eve.
Yes.
Or if you don't believe in Adam and Eve, then you must obviously we came from somewhere. So
Exactly.
Where's that?
Exactly.
Okay, theory of evolution, we came from monkeys.
Exactly.
And I'm just thinking, okay, so let me actually read why that's relevant. So I'm going to read a quote. Okay, so this is when Cass's wife Litwane gave birth to I think it's their third son, their third or second son, but it was a really auspicious occasion. And here's what Cass said in his later years. So that was the rule on the farms. When a child was born, you went to the landlord and said, "We have a baby boy." The landlord would be pleased and say, "Oh, you've had a little monkey. Have you cut off its tail?" Then we would say, "Nearbas, ek het die stakkie afgesnee, is no immense anemia a boboyan me." Yes, master, I have cut off the tail. It's a person now, no longer a baboon. That was how the white farmers used to put it to us. So that was a rule on the farm. It was a custom that you must acknowledge your little child as a monkey. And we say, "Have you cut off the monkey's tail?" And you say, "No, I am." What do you say? Oh, you say, "No, yes, master, I've cut off a tail. It's now a person, no longer a baboon." I mean, I found that so profound because that was the custom, meaning that is how white people of that age, that time, and a few now,
if I may
see
ask,
us.
if I may respond to that by a question.
Yeah.
What creates a culture? Our customs, right? I believe, I think.
Yeah.
Things that you...
Yeah.
So if in the farming community where each and every farmer or farming family had black workers, and as the arrangement was those days, the workers lived on the farm as tenants and as workers as well. Obviously, there will be children born on that farm, black children born on that farm. And if that statement, and when, not even if, that statement is repeated continuously on all of these farms whenever a black child is born, that custom becomes internalized. It becomes a culture. It becomes a way of living.
With how you don't even know it, but it's just how...
Every one of the children of the farm owner is going to repeat that. It becomes a way of life. It becomes a culture. How do you then reverse something like that? Because even if there are laws that say you will never say those things, you carry them, they are there, they still be, you see. And that leads to neo. You change how you present yourself, you see. And when we make that argument to say, yes, they may have shared the skin of the wolf, but I believe they've put on a skin of a tiger. So neo-colonials doesn't mean those ways of looking at us have changed. Both people going into Europe are not viewed as human beings. But I can make an argument, or we could make an argument to say those people are just going there to claim what belongs to them, because all those European cities are built by African wealth.
Sure.
Whether it's a controversial statement. It's
That's
controversial
a statement that
because
would make you some enemies, but I mean, there's
it's
validity in it.
controversial because someone says it's controversial,
Yeah,
but someone behind me may say it's valid.
absolutely.
So who carries more weight? Those who control the flow of information will amplify the fact that my statement is racist, my statement is xenophobic, or anti-white supremacist, or doesn't advantage this one. There will be so many angles dissecting that statement that it doesn't matter. It's there, and they can't control what I say. I can control what I say based on the information available in my environment. So did you cut the tail of the child?
Yeah, the monkey.
The
That's
monkey.
not a. If you didn't cut it, it's not a child.
Yes.
Yes.
And then you are forced to acknowledge that you have been insulted, and respond in a manner that rubs the insult into your soul, and say, yes, my boss, I did cut the tail of the baboon. It is now a human being. You even forced to acknowledge that you are a baboon. And yes, so
yeah, so that's it's just a little example of how we've had to acclimatize ourselves to this racial superiority framework, and how it's been so ingrained into our minds.
And during those days, there were lawyers, there were lawmakers, people well versed in the area of law. And law, by its very nature, is supposed to be human rights based. Whether it's a business contract, it looks at the value of the human being that is going to implement that contract, business, social agreements, marriage, everything is about the right of the person, the right of the body of the person to be respected. When these laws were made, where was the human rights portion of these laws? It was there, but it was only eligible to be enjoyed by the other races.
Because we were not viewed as humans.
So that still there. When Africans landed on foreign lands to work, to harvest sugarcane farms and cotton fields and all the other agricultural products of the time, and in all other areas, in their houses and so forth. Some of them worked for judges. Some of the judges at the time owned farms, and they owned slaves. Didn't they have that radical intelligence to see that this is wrong, this practice is wrong? So when some legal arguments are made and adjustments are made by the former colonizer, one has to be very vigilant in looking at, are they really well-intentioned, or are they subtly still perpetuating colonialism, which we now call neo. What Kasmaine went through, question is it still going through? Is it still happening to this day? We may find very practical, good examples of what Kas went through, still happening to this day. So vigilance, not necessarily militant, but one has to be very careful how we navigate this life, when more especially we deal with the other.
You know, I think we should end there. And I mean, I have nothing to add to that, that beautiful final statement, other than the fact that we don't want to create, we don't want to infuse or entrench division.
Not at all. No.
We don't. We have to acknowledge the past.
Yes.
We have to acknowledge history, because history informs the present, and the present informs the future.
Absolutely, yes.
So the truth is that once upon a time there was an other, and now we have been so interconnected.
Yes.
But there's just something that we need to just know where we came from as individuals, so that we don't lose parts of ourselves. So
history is a good teacher.
History is a good teacher.
And we shouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past.
We shouldn't. So that's why we have this podcast.
And we have a country to build.
And we have a country to build. And we hope to remind the people in this country to look back. And books are the guardians of that knowledge.
Absolutely, yes.
So I haven't even reached apartheid yet. We're in 1936.
I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the next part of the podcast.
Yeah.
And we can share with our audience this beautiful, beautiful book that is a microcosm of all of us.
Even basically. The writing is beautiful. Like,
thank you for sharing with us this book.
And thank you for recommending that I read this. Thank you. So, I mean, I never would have thought, I probably would have walked past this book without knowing what a treasure it is. So I really thank you.
You're most welcome.
Okay, so thank you guys for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this podcast.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.